Let's talk about your third essay, the Discourse Community essay worth 150 points. When you're working on the essay, I recommend you download the PowerPoint titled Discourse Community Essay Format, I believe it's fully called, to get more detailed information about these guidelines. And this video, I'm also going to cover the PowerPoint as well. So for this essay, you'll conduct and write an essay on your chosen community, a community of your choice, because the theme this week is understanding discourse theory. So you can choose any community. Again, it's open topic. Any community that you want. There are a few limitations, so let me clarify that. It must be from one of the following ideas. Number one, if there is a future job interest that you have, so that job location. So for example, if you're in the medical field and you want to become a dentist, you could conduct a community essay on a dentist office. That could be something. So future job location related to your major. That's one option. If you don't really want to talk about careers or jobs in general, that's okay. So a second option is just a community that you would like to learn more about. Communities are nice to learn about because we learn more about the members, how they communicate, the types of genres they use, levels of expertise. Y'all get it. You saw the lectures on John Swales and activity theory triangle, all that stuff you're learning about for the community. So a community that you're not a current member of that you want to learn more about, that's an option. Or, you know what, if you're tired of reality, you want a little bit of a break, that's okay. Number three is a different type of option you can do where you think about a fictional community based on maybe your favorite character in a book or a story or a movie or TV show. Just be careful and make sure that character is a member of a community. It has to, in order for it to be a community, it has to have more than one person. So what community is that character a part of? That's what you would analyze for the paper. Once you decide what you want to write about, then choose one, only one, so not both. We learned about two theories this week. John Swales, the concept of discourse community theory, and we also learned about activity theory triangle. You're choosing one of those. Whichever one you enjoyed more, understood more. I personally like activity theory triangle a little bit more, but that's just my preference. John Swales is a really good theory as well, and they're very similar. It might depend also just on what community you're writing about. Some communities work a little bit better with one of the theories than the other. So you're just choosing one of these two, not both. Make sure you are aware of the theories before you get started on your paper. So once you've figured all that out, these are the required section headings. Section headings in a paper are the titles used before a paragraph. So there's specific rules for APA. We are finally getting into APA with this paper. So you need to have section headings because this isn't a traditional 5-paragraph essay. It's very, very different. So section headings guide the reader along and organize all your information for each section. Okay, so the first section is the introduction. But I only have it as introduction here to make it a little bit clearer on the guidelines. But for your paper, don't title this section introduction. Instead, use the title of your paper, whatever you're calling your paper, as the main heading. And make it bolded and centered like here. So basically, all your section headings should be bolded and centered as I have done here for the guidelines. So make sure you have it like that. That's an APA rule because they're all level 1 headings, meaning they all have their own conventions in that section that what should go in there. All right. So the title of your paper here instead of introduction. What you're doing in the introduction is you're introducing your chosen community. Explain what it is. It's that background, context information that we're getting familiar with. No sources needed there's not really sources needed for this paper. The only source you're working on is the theory. That's the only source. Since you didn't create the theory, we're depending on that theory as our source. So introduce your community, explain what it is, have a thesis statement that tells the audience which theory your paper will apply to what community, combines the whole point of the paper. And I'm going to go into the PowerPoint with a little more detail soon. Literature review section. Make sure this time that you title it literature review. A literature review summarizes an idea or a theory that you didn't create. A literature review is the past. The rest of this paper, especially the discussion, is the present, meaning the new theory, the new information that you're finding and adding to already existing information. So literature review is already existing information that you are summarizing to your audience. So for the literature review, you're pretending they have never heard of whichever theory you chose, so you're explaining it to them. You're basically doing what I did in the lecture for these two theories, and you explain all the components or the characteristics of the theory, what those components are called, and what they mean. So you're not applying it to your community in the literature review. You're just telling them, hey, this is what the theory is about. You're assuming they're new to the theory, so you're teaching them what each part of the theory means. You need an APA in-text citation somewhere within. If you want to put it at the very last sentence, that's fine, or introduce it at the beginning of the paragraph, that's fine. You need to give credit to the theory because you didn't create the theory. You aren't John Swales and you did not create activity theory. So you have to give credit to those theorists because you're borrowing that to explain and summarize it in your literature review. So make sure you reviewed my APA lectures as well for that. The discussion section is the most important part of the paper. It is where you are applying all aspects of the theory, either Swales or activity theory, to the community you chose. So basically how my lectures were doing it, where we practiced with, I believe what was it, Starbucks, right? Yeah, Starbucks was in the Discourse community lecture. And then our class, our English 1301 class, was the example for activity theory. So you're doing the same thing, but in the form of an essay, and that's what the discussion is. Be as specific as possible. Use examples. Explain why those examples represent each part of the theory. You must mention the names of each component of the theory. There's 6 characteristics for John Swales. There's 6 part of activity theory. Make sure you mention the names of all those in the paper, in the discussion. Recommendation for the discussion. The discussion is lengthy. You can write as one long paragraph if you want. It's a little bit harder to read, or you can break up each aspect of the theory per paragraph. Regardless, use transition words, meaning I'll have a chart for you for transition words on Blackboard. Transition words guide the reader to each example so that they don't get confused, because we're assuming we're teaching our audience new information, so we want to make it as clear as possible. Next section is the conclusion. Have it bolded and centered as so, like here, and title it conclusion. The conclusion, you just evaluate. You put a theory to the test. You became a theorist in this essay. That's why I like this essay a lot. You become a theorist. So you tested a theory out for a community to find out if it passed the test. Is it a discourse community? It passes the test if it meets all components, if you found examples for all components of the theory. So did it pass the theory test? And then also answer this question, just to kind of think of that so what factor. Should it be classified as a discourse community? Maybe even answer the question, why are communities important to learn about? Why? Make sure it's a developed paragraph of at least 5 sentences or more. So that's a conclusion. You also need a reference page. So that should be a new page after conclusion. I'll add that on here to clarify. Make sure this is on its own page. Reference pages are the last page of a report. Title it reference, singular reference because there's only one source. You need the completed reference for Swales or activity theory, whichever one you chose, in APA format. So again, make sure you're reviewing my APA videos. I have the article for Swales and I have the article for activity theory to help you find the author, the year it came out, the title of the source, the publication, and all that fun stuff for you to complete and get really practiced for your next essay after this, the argument research essay. So think about media and design, the required format for this essay. Again, you need a title page. Page 1 of your paper should be a title page in APA format, reference page of the source. And make sure your paper is double spaced, 12-point font, 1-inch margin, 700 words or more, meaning about 3 full pages or more. This does not include the title or reference page. So I start counting with the first paragraph of your report. Make sure you're writing in third person, so make sure you're reviewing that chart about the difference between first, second, and third. Third person is very important for this paper because you're not persuading the audience to believe your side. You're presenting information that you found about a community. And APA format, of course. This is due Sunday, June 14th. So this is not a research paper. You're not finding sources. The only source you're using is the theory that you've learned about this week. That's it. If it helps, if you need to find a little bit of information about your community, Google searches, or if you're thinking about a fictional community, you're referring to the the show or the book or the movie that it's about, that's fine. You don't have to put that on a reference page. You're finding factual information about a community. You're not finding theory, or you're not including an author's ideas or arguments. So you do not need to put that in the reference page. And like I said, this paper is worth 150 points. Grading rubric is what I'm asking for. Do you have a literature review section that explains the theory to the audience? Swales test or activity triangle test is the most, because that's the discussion section where you're applying the theory to the community with specific examples for all of the components. Clarity and organization. Do you have it organized? Is it easy to follow along? Do you have all the required sections that I'm asking for with the titles here? And then APA writing fluency, few to no grammatical errors. Do you have a title page and a reference page that's formatted correctly in APA format? And also, I should add this to, is it in third person as well? So this PowerPoint can help you as you work along this essay. I want to just kind of explain it. This officially is called a Discourse Community Ethnography essay. I just had to shorten it a little bit with the purposes of summer school, but you could still learn a lot about this essay just by finding information about a community. So an ethnography is a form of research where the researcher observes a population and takes extensive notes on how individuals communicate and function as a society. You're observing members of a community of your choice for this essay and taking notes on how to apply either John Swale's discourse community theory or activity triangle theory to that community to learn more about it. And you're sharing those notes by applying the theory to it. So just remember to review my APA PowerPoints and lectures, but make sure you have an APA formatted title page, page 1. These are the required sections as we discussed. I should also add the reference page on there, of course. Added reference. So for your introduction, you are teaching your audience 3 concepts in this paper. Your introduction should have the following information: a definition of what a discourse community is. How can you explain what a community is in your own words? What community you're writing about. You want to assume your audience doesn't know anything about this community, so explain that to them. Brief summary. And what theory is your paper applying? Your thesis should be 1 sentence that combines 2 and 3 specifically, because it lets the audience know what type of paper you're writing and what you're doing in the paper, what the point of it is. So if it helps, combine 2 and 3 into 1 sentence. And that's your thesis. Make sure your thesis is somewhere in the introduction, preferably at the end. And just note that this paper should be in third person. Make sure you review that worksheet on Blackboard, because you're not persuading your audience to believe anything. You are just adding new discussion about a community of your choice. Literature review section. Before you apply the theory, you have to assume your audience doesn't know anything about it. So this literature review section is brief, say a paragraph at the most. Nothing less than a paragraph, of course. This section explains what the theory is. That way, when they move on to the next part, they understand the theory better first. You're prepping them before you've applied it. Kind of like what I did in my lectures for them. I explained what they were first, then I applied it to a practice. So describe in your own words, meaning paraphrase. Paraphrase, summarize the theory. One of the following: either the John Swale's concept of discourse community, where you explain those 6 characteristics that makes up a discourse community he defines. goals, intercommunication, genre, all that stuff. Or if you chose activity theory, there's 6 components, especially one of them splits into 2, so make sure you describe that. What are those 6 components of the triangle? What do they mean? Now, I know you all are scholars of English 1301 and you all are super smart, but you didn't create the theory, right? You did not create this theory, unfortunately. So we have to give credit to our theory because we are borrowing it. We are borrowing that idea to apply it to a community of our choice. Since we are borrowing somebody else's theory that they created, we have to give credit. So make sure you provide the APA in-text citation in this section because you're referring to a source, either this one or this one. This is a PowerPoint from the past. We're workshopping APA this week, not face-to-face in class. But an in-text citation would look like this: author, last name, year. You're not using direct quotes here. You're just paraphrasing the literature review. You're paraphrasing the theory in your own words. So at the very end of that last sentence, or if you want to start with the in-text citation first, then that's where you want to place it. You can, if you want to directly quote the articles, these are provided on Blackboard for you. You can if you want to practice APA, but just summarize that theory and put the in-text citation. And just a note, remember that don't even think about your community that you're talking about. If I'm talking about Starbucks, I'll use Starbucks since we can't use that. You can't use that one since I used it in my lecture. Remember not to use any of the communities in my lectures because the answers were given to you. So forget about your community, forget about, pretend you're writing about Starbucks, forget about Starbucks for a second when you're writing this literature review, and only talk about what theory is and the characteristics that make up that theory, defining what the theory is. And don't forget the in-text citation. Discussion. You told your audience what community you're writing about. You explained the theory you're using. So now what? Well, now it's the whole point of the paper. Now you have to put it all together in one of the following ways: applying all of John Swale's, applying all of activity theory. This section can be one entire lengthy paragraph, or you can write a paragraph for each of the 6 characteristics components. Regardless, use topic sentences. Review that worksheet about topic sentences. Topic sentences are the first sentence of a paragraph that let the audience know what the entire paragraph will be about. And use transition words. Again, review those worksheets. Transition words, to continue, next, first, therefore. Those are transition words. They guide the reader along and they help organize this section big time. Just to make it clear for the audience, this is the most important section of the report because it proves or disproves the theory with examples. Meaning, hey, people communicate verbally by speaking to each other one-on-one. They use the syllabus as an example of genres, so on and so forth. Also note that, we're continuing. Helpful hints with this section: always mention the name of each characteristic of John Swale's theory or each component of activity theory triangle. Some of the characteristics for John Swale are genre, lexis, levels of expertise. Make sure you're using those words. Or activity theory mentions tools, division of labor, subject. Make sure you're using those words. That could significantly hurt your grade if you're not, because I won't be sure what examples belong to what, and it's also just not very audience aware. It's very confusing to your audience. Think about that rhetorical analysis essay you completed already. I mentioned that you had to use the words ethos, pathos, and logos because that's part of the analysis. This is part of the ethnography. You have to use the component names. So I have 2 examples in red and correct. People talk in person in this community. They use a menu, text, and have receipts. As a reader, can you tell where these examples belong? Probably not. So remember to use the words. Intercommunication. Another example of intercommunication, so on and so forth. And make sure you're using examples. You're not just saying they have intercommunication and then you move on to the next part. What specifically? You have to prove to your audience that you understand this theory and you can find examples for it. The more examples you find for each characteristic of these theories, the better. Because it gets you a better grade. It shows that you can find numerous examples. You don't have to overdo it. Don't be drained, but more examples, the better. So that might help you choose a community that would be a good choice for this paper, but just don't overwhelm yourself, of course, but try to find as many examples as you can. Fully write about each characteristic with your examples before you move on. Don't do something called jumping back and forth. For example, if you chose John Swales, don't write about common goals shared between members, then write about genres they use, then jump back to other goals. Once you fully talk about the one characteristic, move on to the next one. Keep it focused. That's a major part of the rubric, meaning clarity and organization. Conclusion, evaluate. Did it pass the theory test? Should it be classified as a discourse community? It passes if it meets all components or characteristics. And discuss the importance of communities. That goes full circle, reverts back to your introduction where you define communities. So your conclusion, you're discussing the importance. Reference page. In the literature review section, you reference a source, one of those two. Since you didn't create the theory, you have to have the full reference information, so make sure you're reviewing my APA information. Use the APA template on Blackboard. These would be cited as articles, so that's a hint for you. It's like an APA scavenger hunt. So it would be they're not a book, it's not from a book, and it's not from a website or a video. These sources are published articles, so cite them as so. Types of communities to help you brainstorm does not have to be anything on this list, but this is what I've seen from students of the past. Think of what you have an interest in, where you want to work in the future, or what fiction genres you like, and brainstorm from there. Is there a workplace you'd like to work for in the future? Military, is there a military group you have an interest, or military branch you have an interest in? Type of sports, music or art, any type of music or art community, a museum even, something of that nature, a band, that'd be a cool community. Internet groups are a great way to learn about something. Religious groups as well. Video game community that you don't know about quite as well, you want to learn about. If you chose the fiction route, just remember that what group is that character a part of? So, for example, what have I read in the past? I had somebody write about the Avengers because they're a community. They share a goal of saving the world. So that's a community. The movie Mean Girls, the Plastics, they're a community. Those high school dramas are great, or comedies and genre dramas are really great choices if you're choosing fiction. Anything that's a group of people who share common goals. Doesn't have to be a community that I mentioned that it has to be something that you want to be a part of as one of the choices, but it also could just be a community that interests you. Maybe you have zero interest in joining this group. You just want to learn more about them. So anything like of the sorts. And just remember that a community is more than one person. All right, here's some silly memes to maybe entertain you. These are getting so outdated. Just the Godzilla one is really random, but it doesn't really work for this. And again, just as a final reminder, don't choose a community from my lectures, and don't choose a community you're currently a member of or were a member of in the past. The one from my lectures, well, that's an obvious reason why, because the answers were already provided for you, so that's not very fair. So don't choose Starbucks and don't choose English 1301, all right? Don't choose a community that you're a member of or were a member of in the past. You have no idea how many times I used to allow this, and it's not that it's a bad idea, it's just 99, I'm not even exaggerating, % of the time when students did that, they were so bored writing the paper. They were bored to tears because they know it so well. So it seems easy, right? But it's just, there's nothing is learned from it. Okay, you maybe learn a little bit, you think about the community in a different angle. Just writing it becomes very tedious. So that's just a little final note for you. And stop by my office hours if you want to brainstorm ideas with me, or if you want me to I can share my screen and you can share yours, which is a nice thing in Microsoft Teams, where we can work on this draft and see where you're going.